Hogwarts Legacy is a masterpiece. It's one of the best open world games ever made. It's at least a 9 or even a 10 out of 10. It's a remarkable experience for the open world genre. And I believe none of these things. So look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. If you click on this video expecting only praises, then I guess you should probably go and watch Angry Joe or something. There is no shortage of videos like those. That being said, in this video I intend to balance things a bit, the good and the bad. Aspects of the game where it really shines, versus parts of it which kinda suck, to be honest. Now when it comes to Hogwarts Legacy, I often feel like if this game did not take place in the Harry Potter universe, and it was totally a new IP nobody heard before, I'm pretty sure the reception would have been different. I think many people were so excited to see this universe come to life as a video game again that would absolutely overlook and ignore its many flaws. However, I wouldn't consider myself a Harry Potter fan. I watched the movies, they are okay for the most part. I never read the books, but I still was quite interested in the game anyway, so after many hours playing it, I finally managed to form an opinion. Things that I liked, some things that I didn't, and some things that I absolutely hated. Without wasting any more time, here we go, 7 things I love and hate about Hogwarts Legacy. The very first few hours of the game can be rather impressive. The scenery is quite beautiful and quickly introduces the player into a magical world that is full of potential wonders and mysteries. But also there's quite a lot to learn gameplay-wise, which can grab and maintain your interest for a significant amount of time. So yeah, I really enjoyed the beginning of this game. One of the most impressive aspects of Hogwarts Legacy that made quite a good impression was the castle. It's pretty damn big with so many rooms and corridors and a few hidden areas, which really made me want to explore it. Also, I really loved the level of details and creativity that went into it, from animated paintings to moving statues that move when you at least expect. I have to admit, it's pretty damn fun to explore it. So as number 3 is the open world visual design. After exiting the castle, I was curious how the world actually looks outside. And I have to say, it did not disappoint. The playfulness and whimsical nature you find inside the castle was carried a bit outside too. I particularly enjoyed how small villages and towns were designed, almost like something out of a fairy tale, which the game insists of reminding us, but nonetheless, it's a very pretty game to look at. As number 4 has to be the changing seasons. The game through the course of it will change from summer to autumn and winter. Now it's snow everywhere, it's Christmas time. I quite like that, and I think more games should play around with seasonal changes, since adds so much to the scenery. And also brings new life into the old places you already visited and makes you re-explore those locations and see how they look now. This one might be a smaller point, but I really found the flying book that guides the player towards the next objective very useful. Especially when you consider how big the castle is and how many floors and levels and intricate areas has, finding the next objective without this feature would have been a nightmare. As for number 6, the combat can be pretty fun, especially during the honeymoon period of the game, where you're still learning how it works and some new stuff as well. Learning to combine and link spells together can be also pretty fun, and really makes the combat sometimes feel like a duel of wizards. As for number 7, some of the quests the game has to offer are really enjoyable. For example, the Sam Baker's trial was pretty fun. I got to fight and also ride for a brief moment this cool looking beast. I only wished it was a bit longer. The Polly Joyce plot was pretty funny, disguising as Professor Black. The Fitzgerald trial had a very interesting concept. First of all, I loved how they changed the visuals, which makes for a quite unique experience. Hiding from death also made those stealth sections more memorable than what they usually are. Now, I know this is a 7 things list, but here's a bonus point for the stuff I liked, mainly because probably some of you might hate me for the stuff I disliked. Anyway, the last thing I want to mention are the spells. The game has to offer quite a nice amount of spells to play around with, and some of them can be pretty fun, like Thunderstrike your enemies, or burning them, or turning them into an explosive barrel, which can be thrown at the rest of the gang. And of course, Leviosa, or Levioso,
It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
Yeah, that spell is pretty fun too. Okay, so that's for the things I liked. Now let's switch up to things I disliked. And no better start with the open world activities. The open world design of Hogwarts Legacy is everything I hate about many titles nowadays of this genre. Basically, you have a few types of the same copy-paste activities which are sprinkled all over the map. Moreover, these activities are excruciatingly boring and uncreative. First, you have the typical bandits enemies camps, which are just as generic as you might expect. Among this, you will also fight giants, which are somehow even more boring to fight. Then you have the Merlin trials, which boil down to a few puzzle types repeated throughout the course of the entire game. I cannot believe how uncreative and dull these are. Shoot these shrines in the correct order, or carry this boulder to its initial location, or match these symbols, just to name a few. In a fantasy game with magic, where you can basically take almost complete freedom, that's really the best thing they came up with. Now this wouldn't be such a big issue if these activities represented a small portion of the open world. But unfortunately, that's around 90% of the open world stuff the game has to offer.
For Hogwarts Legacy is a 10 out of 10. That's right, badass seal of approval.
Number 2, the combat. Now I initially praised the combat, and for a few hours can be pretty fun. But unfortunately it falls prey to the same old spamming fest, briefly interrupted by Leviosa, Accio or other spells in order to break the enemy's defense, or to deal more damage. You can also grab objects from the environment and then use them against enemies. But then you go back to spam. I try to play around with different spells and combinations, but eventually I end up with the same few I used all the time, since they got the job done rather quickly. And there's not much of a reason to switch spells that often, since many do the same thing, and clearly some of them are better than others. I think the combat missed a lot of great opportunities here. A system which engages the player more actually could have worked better, maybe a bit similar to Okami or Arx Fatalix, where you actually get to cast the spells yourself. But if you fail to do it properly, let's say there's a negative side effect, instead of throwing enemies into the air or turning them into barrels, the effect applies to you. In the third Harry Potter film, there is this absurd and funny scene where Harry uses a spell to cause this woman to swallow and float like a balloon. Then his adoptive uncle grabs her foot and for a brief moment they both float into the air. This scene encapsulates the playful and absurdity of some of the best Harry Potter moments that even today stood out in my mind. It's such a shame the game never managed to capture this through gameplay. The lack of sandbox interactive systems makes the gameplay extremely stale and repetitive. Imagine the scenario I mentioned before, but applied to enemies. Maybe you sneak around an enemy camp and then you use a spell which makes one of the guys float like a balloon. But as the rest of the enemies see him, they rush and start grabbing his foot. But then they all float for a few seconds. In the meantime, you can take care of the rest of the gang, or shoot the balloon down and they all take damage fall, or simply die. Anyway, I hope you get the point, there is so much more they could have done. Number 3. The RPG side of Hogwarts Legacy is a joke. First, I don't think the game is much of an RPG in the first place. Sure, you get to edit the appearance of your own character, and choose a house and unlock a few skills later. However, none of the things I mention here really matter, and have almost zero impact on roleplay. There's barely any difference between houses aside from one quest, your own room and a few other small things. Initially I wanted to play as a Slytherin, in the hope maybe, I have the option to pick on other students, act maybe like a bully, but the interaction and dynamics between houses is completely missing. I mean, for fans who love the movies or read the books, why on earth this is not an issue big enough, considering how important it was in the movies at least. The skill tree, if you can even call it one, it's very limited and doesn't really allow for a unique character progression or specialization. It's such a shame, mainly because there was some real potential for the game to be an actual RPG, but none of its systems are deep enough or offer enough choices in order for me to really consider it an RPG. You might wanna check this video where I explain a bit in more details what I personally believe an RPG actually is. Number 4. The loot system is pretty bad. The type of loot this game uses can be summed up to constantly finding gear pieces that will replace the old ones. It's nothing really new. Titles such as Cyberpunk 2077, some of the Assassin's Creed games, Origins and Odyssey or Gotham Knight, just to name a few, use the same loot system. Personally, I'm not really a big fan of this. I much rather find unique set pieces, on a rarer occasion rather than constantly be showered by the same looking items, but with slightly better numbers. However, in Hogwarts Legacy, this system is made even worse than in other games. First, in the beginning you only have 20 slots available for the stuff you find, in a game which constantly drops items in every single chest you find, so you better fast travel to sell those or throw them away. In both cases, there's a shitton of time wasted just micromanaging your inventory. Then the next problem is the stuff you actually find. You see, when this loot system was used in Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Cyberpunk 2077, at least some of those items were visually appealing, like a chunky and meaty heavy armor or some cool looking weapons, which translated much better in the whole idea of getting better and improving. But in Hogwarts Legacy you find what? Like a scarf? Some goggles? Man, I can't wait to explore the world and complete these boring as fuck activities just to find more gloves or another scarf. Now, some of these combinations might look better than others, but since they don't provide a path to any type of unique specialization, I couldn't care less what I was finding. Number 5. Lack of enemy variety. Through the game you'll encounter small spiders, wolves, big spiders, giants, humans, blue spiders, goblins, and did I mention red spiders? There's a shitons of spiders, yeah. Once you've seen these enemies, there's very little surprise left. Also, there's something very sad about the game, which is supposed to be magical and fantasy, to be constrained and limited to a handful of enemies you will have to fight over and over. This combined with a repetitive combat makes this game really tiresome after a while. Number 6. The lack of interaction within the world you explore. While I do appreciate the fact you can access many interiors, mostly for collectibles, strangely enough I haven't seen people actually living inside those houses. However, the interaction with the NPCs you encounter in this world is almost non-existent. You can't really talk to anybody, they don't even acknowledge your presence, and they barely react to the stuff happening around them. For example, when enemies are nearby, they just vanish into the thin air. You won't see random encounters or dynamic moments happening around you. And it's a bit of a shame honestly, because the open world it's really not that big, with thousands of people in it, like you may see in other games. It's definitely a smaller and denser open world, which could provide plenty of opportunities and interaction. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. Number 7. So the last thing that really bothers me is how much they effed up the flying in this game. One of the most anticipated feature was the flying mechanic, getting your own broomstick and flying around. Well, aside from the fact it takes quite a lot of hours to get access to it, the controls are really bad. While in air you can move the camera left and right, which also changes the player's direction, but you cannot move it on the vertical axis. For that I need to use other commands. Now keep in mind I'm using the mouse and keyboard here. This makes for a pretty terrible flying experience. Anyway, so in conclusion, Hogwarts Legacy is a decent game. There were things that I definitely liked about it, but plenty of others that I didn't. I think it's a title massively overblown by fans and the hype culture, where nostalgia for a good old Harry Potter times influence how people perceive this game. But in the end, as someone who is not that invested in the Harry Potter universe, I only look at this game for what I think it is, a decent but kind of a mediocre experience.
Precisely.